What happened when there was not enough men and too many young people in the 1890s Philadelphia black community? Was this something that was helpful to them or harmful? More harmful, according to Dr. Du Bois's writing from his 1899 book titled The Philadelphia Negro. Now, having previously gone over the historical accounts on the rise and fall of Negroes in Philadelphia from 1780 going over into 1870, Dr. Du Bois now focuses on the immediate factors contributing to the struggles faced by black Philadelphians during his time in the late 19th century and going into the 20th century, particularly those of too many women and too many young people. Follow along.
It cannot be denied that the main results of the development of the Philadelphia Negro since the war have on the whole disappointed his well-wishers.
Since the war means after the Civil War, ending in 1865. The people from other groups who hoped that Negroes would have done better after the war ended up disappointed.
They do not pretend that he has not made great advance in certain lines, or even that in general he is not better of today than formerly.
They recognized that blacks had made a lot of progress in certain areas, mainly educational and academic, and they were better off in general than in the days of slavery and right after emancipation.
They do not even profess to know just what his condition today is, and yet there is a widespread feeling that more might reasonably have been expected in the line of social and moral development than apparently has been accomplished.
They didn't know exactly what their condition was. They didn't have the hard data. But they had a feeling that Negroes should have developed more in the moral department, meaning things that blacks deemed acceptable as right and wrong. And they should have developed further in the social department, meaning better behavior in public, forming more stable families, following the laws of the land, and so forth. They expected blacks in Philadelphia to be further along in these areas following the war. Now, here he's referring to the sentiment of the people during this time that he conducted his research for this book, which was from 1896 to 1897, which was just a little over 30 years after the Civil War.
Not only do they feel that there is a lack of positive results, but the relative advance compared with the period just before the war is slow, if not an actual retrogression.
They believed blacks were either walking very slow up the mountain, or if anything, they were walking back down the mountain. And here's why.
An abnormal and growing amount of crime and poverty can justly be charged to the Negro.
Some of the crime was exaggerated and due to unfair policing during this time, that's for sure. But a large portion of the increasing crime in Philadelphia could be justifiably attributed to blacks, along with the increase in poverty.
He is not a large taxpayer, holds no conspicuous place in the business world or the world of letters, and even as a working man seems to be losing ground.
We know at least one reason for blacks not being large taxpayers at this time, and that's because they were strategically blocked off from working in many of the growing industries.
For these reasons, those who, for one purpose and another, are anxiously watching the development of the American Negro desire to know first how far these general impressions are true, what the real condition of the Negro is, and what movements would best be undertaken to improve the present situation. And this local problem is, after all, but a small manifestation of the larger and similar Negro problems throughout the land. For such ends the investigation, the results of which are here presented, was undertaken.
That's why this book was written. It was to investigate the condition of the Negroes, document the severity of the Negro problems, and find out if the perceptions that people had about blacks were statistically true. So from now on in the book, Dr. Du Bois is dealing with his present observation of blacks. Prior to this, he gave us history leading up to this point, and now he's documenting the condition of Negroes in Philadelphia at his time.
Before, however, we enter upon the consideration of this matter, we must bring to mind 4 characteristics of the period we are considering,
which is basically the historical and social framework that contributed to the condition of blacks he studied at his present time. What he wants is for the readers to keep a broader context in mind when examining his study, which he says consists of 4 parts, and that's the population growth of Philadelphia, the increase of European immigrants into the city of Philadelphia, the new industries that helped create wealth for mostly everyone else other than the blacks. And last but not least,
finally, into this rapid development have precipitated themselves during the last 20 years 15,000 immigrants, mostly from Maryland, Virginia, and Carolina, untrained and poorly educated countrymen, rushing from the hovels of the country or the cottages of country towns, suddenly into the new strange life of a great city to mingle with 25,000 of their race already there.
Southern country Negroes coming into the city by the thousands, who were unfit and ill-prepared for city life, which was a vastly different world from living out there in the boonies, right? My entire life, I lived in multiple cities until I was 26. Then I moved out into the country and noticed easily that these two are worlds apart from each other, right? In fact, my uncle from the city of Compton, he came out to visit me and he said, "Nephew, I can't do it out here." He said, "It's too quiet out here. I need to see some liquor stores and people walking," right? Wild stuff like that, right? But that's his take, right? That's his take on it, right? Because they're completely different worlds. So I could imagine how dazed the 15,000 Negroes were when they came into contact with the contrasting city life. Okay? Now, let's get a little bit more from here on the Negro population in the city at this time.
Of all the large cities in the United States, only 3 have a larger absolute Negro population than Philadelphia: Washington, New Orleans, and Baltimore. We seldom realize that none of the great southern cities, except the 3 mentioned, have a colored population approaching that of Philadelphia.
Here on this chart, it shows the southern cities with the largest population of Negroes. Philadelphia had roughly 40,000 Negroes during the time of this study, and we can see that D.C. had almost twice as many. Then you have New Orleans, Richmond, Charleston, Nashville, Memphis, Louisville, Atlanta, and Savannah.
Scanning this population more carefully, the first thing that strikes one is the unusual excess of females.
In a bit, he explains the impact of this, so continue to observe.
This fact, which is true of all Negro urban populations, has not often been noticed and has not been given its true weight as a social phenomenon. If we take the 10 cities having the greatest Negro populations, we have this table.
All of the cities, with the exception of maybe St. Louis, had a much higher female to male population. He explains that this had to do with more economic opportunities being available to Negro women in domestic services at an earlier time, and at the same time, a restriction on the employment available to the men. Because up until 1820, lots of work was available for both of the sexes, and their proportion was close to equal. That's what he talks about. But from the 1820s to the 1840s, the opportunity was greatly restricted for the men, which deals with what we've discussed in earlier commentaries about the new economic opportunities being given to the European foreigners and the white Americans, right? So at that time, he states that Philadelphia had 16 women to every 5 men. Then after that period, there were more opportunities opened for the men in the service industry, which then attracted more Negro men.
Nevertheless, the disproportion still indicates an unhealthy condition, and its effects are seen in a large percent of illegitimate births, and an unhealthy tone in much of the social intercourse among the middle class of the Negro population.
He's saying that the imbalance of the sexes contributed to a deeper social problem. It had an impact on the family structure by creating more children outside of marriage. And I assume that his point here is to emphasize how having less men gives women less marital partners to choose from, and may have contributed to less formal relationships. And on the other hand, with men having more women to choose from, they may not have taken the relationship as serious and avoided the responsibilities that came with it, right? But either way, he's implying that this male to female imbalance led to other issues which were affecting the middle class Negroes as well.
Looking now at the age structure of the Negroes, we notice the disproportionate number of young persons, that is, women between 18 and 30 and men between 20 and 35.
So this is another issue that he's finding out, is that not only that there's too many women, is that there's a disproportionate number of young people as well.
The colored population of Philadelphia contains an abnormal number of young untrained persons at the most impressionable age,
meaning still very vulnerable to be molded in the ways of thinking and behaving. So a large portion of the Negro population was young, didn't have any skills for the city life, and were still very much impressionable to be influenced to walk one of many paths available in city living.
at the age when, as statistics of the world show, the most crime is committed,
When others who walk the path of crime in the city encourage other impressionable minds to do the same.
when sexual excess is more frequent, and when there has not been developed fully the feeling of responsibility and personal worth.
All this to point out that the black community at this time was in a vulnerable state. It had a large proportion of unqualified people living in an unstable environment, and likely not enough qualified people in the community to provide the best guidance. So instead of walking the path of steady growth to maturity, some walked the path of crime and impulsive sexual behavior.
We find then in Philadelphia a steadily and, in recent years, rapidly growing Negro population, in itself as large as a good-sized city and characterized by an excessive number of females and of young persons.
So this sets the tone for the group that he was studying. A decent-sized group with a population of Negroes rapidly entering into the city. And what largely defined this group, according to Du Bois, was too many women and too many young people, right? Or you can look at it in another way. Not enough men and not enough old people. And so he suggests that this imbalance was one of the contributors to the problems in the black community of Philadelphia, right? And so from here, what we'll do coming up is get a deeper dive into a specific portion of the community of blacks in the city, as Dr. Du Bois provides us with some firsthand documentation on this portion of the 1890s black community in the city, right? And so we'll notice that there are going to be some similarities and some differences with today, right? So stay tuned for that. But for now, I thank you for your time and your attention. My name is Brooklyn St. Michael, and I'll see you in the free world.